Okay, since we promised this would be a lunch break webinar, I want to go ahead and get started and make sure I honor everyone's time today. I'm Una Hartzell-Baird. I am the Director of Language Services, Director of Translation Services at Luna Language Services. And I want to kick off with just a few housekeeping things. First, I want to make sure you know that Andy Rourke is here as our ASL interpreter. He will be spotlighted. So if you need an ASL interpreter today, he is there. Also, Tiffany Hansen is our outreach manager, and she will be helping me with the technical side of the webinar today. So as questions come in or if there are any issues, she'll be our point person for that. She'll also be communicating after the webinar with the recording, as well as a one-pager handout that we have prepared for you all today. So I am excited to have you all join us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and kick off our presentation. Okay. So we are here for Luna Talks Translation, and our topic is machine translation. This is an area that those of us in the language industry are interested in following. Those of you using translation services are probably already somewhat familiar with. So we wanted to take a moment to take a little time to look at machine translation, what it is exactly, the benefits, the drawbacks, and have a conversation around when it's appropriate to use. So to get us started, if you all wouldn't mind, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Include your name, your pronouns. If you're with an organization that you're representing today, we'd love to see that, and what your role is with Language Access as well. We're excited to have you here. Like I said, I'm Una Hartzell-Baird. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Translation at Luna. Many of you are familiar with us, but for those of you who are new, welcome. Luna is a language services company. We actually just celebrated our 20th anniversary here locally in Indianapolis, Indiana. We work with a number of businesses, nonprofit organizations, government entities, anywhere where there's a language access need. And that's a big part of our mission, is promoting language access as a right. So today we're going to cover what exactly machine translation is. We will discuss the benefits of machine translation and the drawbacks, and then go through some questions to ask to judge when it is appropriate to use machine translation. As always, the gold standard is still human beings doing the translation because of so many of the nuances and cultural aspects of language that machines can't capture yet. So let's dive in. What exactly is machine translation? And I have a quick video to get us started. And this is one that I think most of us are familiar with.
Hey Google. More than 100 billion words are translated every day.
Lift your hand.
Thank you very much for your help.
ご助力ありがとうございます。
Words about food, words about friendship, about sport, about belief, about fear.
Oh my God!
Words that can hurt and sometimes divide. But every day, the most translated words in the world are "How are you?" "Thank you," and "I love you."
So normally, when we have a video like this, it would be embedded as part of the presentation. But the interesting thing about this video is it was available on YouTube when I created this presentation and started working on it. And then about a couple of weeks ago, it disappeared. It became a private video. And I don't know if that's because Google just kind of cleans house every couple of years on the ads to make sure that their newer things are getting eyeballs. But what I found interesting when I had initially looked at this video were the comments and complaints about some of those screenshots you see in other languages that the translations weren't correct or that they could have been a little bit better at least. So Google Translate is one of the big options for machine translation that most of us are familiar with. And in large part, that's because it's so widely available. But even for their own Super Bowl advertisement, they didn't quite get it right. So let's dive into what exactly machine translation is. It is the use of artificial intelligence to provide translation services from a source text into a target language. Machine translation really started out as machine learning, where algorithms were fed into computers to help them learn how to do the work of translation. Now we're seeing this evolving into the use of neural networks, which mimic essentially how the human brain works. And it's a really fascinating area of study. And neural networks have certainly helped machine translation come a long way. These are very different things from computer-aided translation tools, which are there to help translators, help human translators do their work more efficiently with fewer errors and higher accuracy. So there's a little bit of a difference there. So let's talk about some of the benefits. If you want, you can go ahead and pop in the chat. What are some of the benefits you've seen of machine translation? If you've used Google Translate or another proprietary software, or what are some of the perceived benefits if you haven't had experiences with it? And you can feel free to share those in the chat with us. So depending on the machine, if you're using Google Translate, it's pretty widely available as long as you have access to the internet. And there are also proprietary versions of software that can either be licensed or some language agencies create their own. Some of the benefits we see are access, speed, and cost. Access improves, speed improves, and cost drops overall. In addition to that, using machines to do translation helps them learn and become better at doing this type of work, which can help to provide more access to more people eventually. Now, as we're going through today, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Tiffany will jump in and help moderate those, and so I can answer them as we sort of go along. You will also be more than welcome to ask any questions you have after the event as well. Tiffany, you just feel free to jump in. Okay, so what about the drawbacks with using machine translation? Well, depending on the project that you're doing and the type of machine that you're using, security can be an issue, accuracy can be an issue, and along with that, a loss of nuance that was present in the original document. This is an example that was shared with me recently in a way that machines get things wrong that affects another area of our lives. Many of us are familiar with Facebook and with Facebook advertisements, and some of their automated intelligence systems that are there to help speed things up and make them more efficient can cause problems if the type of advertising you're doing is not quite what they're used to or how they've been trained. So businesses that make stylish clothing for people with disabilities have had a lot of trouble getting their ads approved because they have to go through a manual process that Facebook just isn't quite ready to handle at an effective and efficient pace. And machines get things wrong because they're made by people. And sometimes our own blind spots are reflected in the technology that we create. So in addition to some of those drawbacks in terms of security and accuracy and nuance, there are some indirect costs that can add up as well, including a loss of confidence or trust if there is a poor translation representing you or your organization, appearance of favoritism between different languages as well, which can be critical if you're serving a very diverse community, and a loss of competitive edge, because it can take just one other organization doing it a little bit better to see your consumers shift away. So when is it appropriate to use? We know that human translators are still the gold standard, but there are times and places where using machine translation can be helpful. And to make this decision and to figure out if this is the correct choice, there are three basic questions that we like to ask. First, what is the nature of the document? Second, who is the audience? And then third, is security or confidentiality critical? So if you ask yourself, is this project not confidential? Is it an internal communication, maybe a memo? Is it simple or straightforward? And is it in a language combination where machine translation is really strong, like Spanish is one of the stronger translation combinations we see? Then your project might be suitable for machine translation, maybe Google Translate, maybe something proprietary. And if you ask yourself, is this confidential? Is it public facing, complex or nuanced? Is it a language combination where machine translation is really weak and you're saying yes to these things? Then having a human translator is still your best course of action for these types of projects. Machine translation is a growing technology. It's made leaps and bounds of progress since it began, but much like any other technology, it's understanding its limitations is what will help us to successfully implement it, knowing when it's appropriate to use, when it's not, and when it can be something that's supplemental until you can get to the next part of your plan with translation. So that wraps up the presentation portion. I would love to hear your questions, your experiences with machine translation, and I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share.
Una, we don't have any questions yet, but can you maybe provide one or two examples from your experience where you have seen someone utilizing machine translation where it wasn't accurate and where that significantly affected their messaging?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually have a good example of both where it was great and where it didn't work out. So where it didn't work out very well, we see this all the time with our clients with their websites. They come to us and they say, oh, it looks like everything looks fine when I click this little button and translate it into, Spanish or Chinese, but I just want to make sure. And when we take that text and do a post edit on it, it's clear that there's a lot of context that's missing. There's a lot of literal translation that's happened there. And it creates problems because this is their public facing forum, and the way that many of their clients are potentially finding them, or at least being directed to by other community organizations. But one area where we've seen machine translation do really well is in language that's really standardized and dry, like legal contracts. There's not a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of work that's been done to train machines on this type of document as well. So because it's not marketing materials where maybe there's subtlety to the language, plays on words, things like that, that machines really can't do very well yet. things that take almost a rewrite rather than just a translation. Those areas don't succeed with machine translation, but very straightforward information like contracts do very well.
One question from the audience. The languages I usually need are Swahili, Kinyarwanda, Burmese, Karen, and Sango or Kaba. Are there accurate machine translations for these refugee languages?
So unfortunately, those are not as good, partially because they're not as requested as often, so machines don't have as much practice in them. But also it kind of depends on what exactly you're looking to do with the machine translation. But I know, especially with Burmese and Karen, there just aren't enough speakers helping to train the machines and translators, because it's really hard to find even professional translators in those areas. So those are ones that I would not recommend for machine translation.
And one participant would love to know your preferred machine translation services. They specifically mentioned MateCat, which I love the name of that. But do you have any suggested machine translation tools if someone's going to utilize that?
I don't have any ones that I would recommend specifically over others, but what I would say is when you're looking for machine translation options, I would look at compatibility across different tools. So, does it integrate well? Does it play well with competitors and with others, which can be important because if a machine translation system, if one goes ahead of the others and you want to make the switch, you'll want to know that you're not going to lose all of the training that you've provided to that machine in that switch. So knowing what does this process look like if I decide to change platforms, and also knowing, where does this tool integrate with other tools.
And one participant asked if you have any preferred translators to use in websites since you found them to be problematic.
I'm not totally sure I understand that question. Preferred translators to use.
What translation tools would you utilize for websites since machine translation seems to be problematic?
Sure. So typically for websites, we use human translators, and depending on the website platform, there are different tools that integrate that can help to pull the content into like a CAT tool, computer aided translation tool, that can help human translators go through and make sure everything's translated, there are quality checks in place, and then that new data gets uploaded back to that site.
Thank you. We have a comment: when visiting Belgium using Google Translate with the camera, it helped a lot when eating out since most of the menus were in Dutch. It works well with simple words such as food ingredients.
Yes, that's a great observation. And kind of like the Google advertisement showed, where the signs, signage, menus, things like that, usually individual words it can be really helpful with, or things that are really common, like their advertisement showed with hello and thank you and I love you. And those are some of the things that are the first words that we learn when we're learning a new language too. So it can be helpful in those cases. That's a great observation.
We had another observation from a Spanish speaker that says, I have seen machine translation work poorly with translation from Spanish to English when dealing with words, genders in Spanish. It's great to have a human to check. So thank you for sharing that, Leonela. That kind of leads me to ask you too, Una, if I am an organization that is utilizing a machine translation tool because I'm trying to be very budget conscious, but I know that I need to start taking that next step into having a professional agency use human translation for some of my materials, can you talk just a little bit about kind of what's that intermediate area look like for somebody, and what are some ways that organizations could work with an agency like Luna but still stay very budget friendly?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. So one of the options that is available is machine translation post editing. So oftentimes agencies still prefer to use whatever machine they're using for translation in order to be able to guarantee some level of their machine's knowledge being able to make the translation a little bit better than, something like Google Translate. But so what we do with machine translation post editing is we would have a machine translate the information, and then we would provide the source text and the target text to a human editor who would go through and make any recommended changes and tweaks to that machine translation. So it's essentially supporting that translation. That can be done in different ways. And typically what we do for that, because it is still so hit and miss depending on the content and the language, is we would want to take a look at the source text and that machine translation if you're providing it on your own, and then assess whether it is eligible for post editing, or if it would be less time consuming and less expensive to go in and actually do the translation itself from scratch, which sounds counterintuitive, that it would actually cost more money to edit something already done. But oftentimes editing is an hourly job rather than a per word job, which we tend to see with translation. And so the amount of time that it can take to go through a really terrible translation is sometimes more than the time and the cost of doing a translation from scratch using a human translator and editor.
Thank you for clarifying that. It was perfect timing. We had a participant in the comments that shared, I'd like to share another issue that I have seen while performing MTPE. MTPE consumer email correspondence, they sometimes greet the consumer with greetings leader, which the MT translated as a way to greet Hitler. That would have been a disaster if there was no human to fix it. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that.
Yeah.
So that is most of the questions that we've had here in the comments. Does anyone have any additional questions about machine translation or any of the information that Una presented today?
Great. Well, if you all do want to reach out after the webinar, you can find me, and I'll put it in the chat, at Luna360. And on LinkedIn, I am Una DHB. So if you just search for that, you can find me there. I know that Hartzell Baird is a very long name to spell. I did that one just for Andy. So my handle is Una DHB. You can find me there. I'd love to connect with you. Love to help answer any more questions. And I am so thrilled to be able to give you back 3 minutes of your lunch today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.